perspectives. Quick reminder, we will have a brief Q&A session at the end of our discussion tonight. You can submit questions through the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. Those will be filtered out and answered by our panelists. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the night. Our panelists tonight, we'll start with Roderick Lewis. He is a Senior Associate Director of Career Services at UNC Chapel Hill. He is a business coach and talent consultant with expertise in diversity and inclusion, performance improvement, and career management. He has consulted employers on talent acquisition strategies, employee engagement, and employer branding goals. He also worked as an HR consultant in corporate America, focusing on the international recruiting, diversity and inclusion, and employee performance for Latin America, Spain, and the United States. Dr. Lorraine Pacalawagan is a speech pathologist, language specialist, and interculturalist and teacher trainer in the areas of French, Spanish, and English as a second and foreign language. She holds a PhD from the University of Alabama in curriculum and instruction and an MA in TESOL degree from Middlebury Institute of International Studies in California. Dr. Sheldon Gathers is a professor of leadership at Gardner-Webb University and managing director of Sustainable Leadership Group, a management consulting practice. His area of focus includes leadership development, organizational behavior, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Previously, he spent 25 years in banking and retired as Senior Vice President of Bank of America. As consumer sales and senior executive for Bank of America, he was responsible for 350 banking centers and 3,500 associates in Georgia and Tennessee. Lastly, we have Ms. Kadra Green. Kadra is the program manager of supplier diversity for Atrium Health. In her role, she is responsible for partnering with supply chain management to develop and execute strategic procurement strategies and process improvements that are economically viable and socially equitable. With a focus on the purchase of services and products for the healthcare systems across clinical and non-clinical categories, these efforts result in the advancement of diverse supplier purchasing power, increased opportunities, and elevated spend for minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses, and align to system-wide goals and promote connectivity between Atrium Health and its community served. So thank you to our panelists tonight, and we will go ahead and get started with our first question, which will be for Kadra. How is the professional world responding to diversity and equity in your field or industry? With that, is there anything specific your company or organization is doing to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Thank you, Janae, for that introduction. In response to the question, I would say that any discussion around diversity and inclusion is now more important than ever. We have seen from historical data has shown that decades before, there has been a continuous stream of concerns that have happened in the workplace. We have experienced, our parents have experienced, and our grandparents have gone through issues such as racial disparities, racism, prejudice, and have experienced those situations in various aspects of their lives. But we are now at a time when we are having to face these issues head on and have these discussions. We can't just bypass the issue, and knowing that this is going to always be of concern because of the world that we live in today, what we are doing in response in my particular field and industry is that we're having those conversations. We are actively taking the mask off, and in order to become comfortable, you have to get a little bit uncomfortable. And if that means having those uncomfortable discussions about race, religion, gender, everything that makes up a diverse makeup of your workplace, your home, wherever you're situated. And think about it, in the workplace, we are actually, interacting with our teammates for 8+ hours a day, right? And so we want to be in a situation where we're completely comfortable with those that we work with. And the first thing to do in order to take that mask off is to have those conversations. We have to kind of dust off that platform a little bit, and that's to put the issues right in front of us, and be able to have our teammates and employees be able to have that dialogue to address what those issues are, what the prejudices what the prejudices are, and as well as get an understanding of who we are as people. I believe that there has been a little bit of discomfort there, and it's always been a bit of a taboo issue and a taboo subject. But because of what we're dealing with today with the social injustice and the concerns of what's going on in the world, and should we support the police or should we not? And even when it comes to, the top, our government, those issues are ringing out on social media, but let's actually have them on a platform where we can have dialogue that is respectful. And I believe that our workplaces are definitely taking strides to ensure that we're having that dialogue in a respectful manner and also with tact. So with that being said, with my workplace within Atrium, Atrium is supporting those efforts by having groups, establishing groups that are specific to certain issues and certain groups of people. So for example, I'm a member of the Women of Color group, right? And so we actually have sit downs and those fireside virtual chats, so to speak, where we're actually speaking on the issues that we experience as women of color. And anyone in the healthcare system is welcome to join in on these discussions so that they can learn more about what people of color go through on a daily basis. We also celebrate throughout the year various differences such as Black History Month, Asian History Month. These are different things that we also really want to dive into to really understand what makes us different, but also what brings us together. And within my specific group, which is a supplier diversity group, I ensure that we remain fully tight with our diversity councils. So that includes the National Minority Supplier Development Council, the Charlotte LGBT Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. And let's not forget the Veterans National Council as well. All of this is important so that we can continue to have that education, so that we can remain up to date on the issues that are affecting our business world, as well as the world today outside of healthcare, and that we can really make sure that we streamline everything together so that we are educating our employees to the best of our ability and with the most up-to-date information.
Thank you. Did any of our other panelists want to tell us a little bit about their professional world and their responses?
Yeah, I'll chime in and thank you, Kadra, for doing a great intro. With where I work, so I've got a few perspectives, but I'll talk about where I work now at UNC Chapel Hill, which is a university. And I would say universities are a little slower to adapt to diversity, equity, inclusion as it pertains to how they support their staff and students and faculty as well to some degree. And so what you have, especially with in the university world, we talk about primarily white institutions, and then we have minority serving institutions, and that can be broken down to HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions and a large number of other institutions that would fall under this minority serving institution banner. But specifically when I think about primarily white institutions or predominantly white institutions, it's a little slow there in terms of I think we're still scratching the surface. So we're starting to have those conversations. We're starting to have training. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Racial Equity Institute. They're based out of Greensboro, North Carolina. And we've had them at UNC Chapel Hill a few times, like for 4-day workshops, half-day workshops. And they don't brand themselves as diversity and inclusion consultants, but they're really talk about the historical context of how we got to where we are today in terms of a lot of these racial inequalities and social injustices. And I applaud that type of training because it's really a deep dive type of training and type of level of awareness to where I feel it's necessary to be able to have, as Kadra so eloquently put it, those uncomfortable conversations, right? So you have to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations in order to advance some of these areas of racial equity and social injustices that we face today. And so they really look at that historical context, because without that, what I argue is that when you don't have the historical context, then you can do all these other types of trainings, but then they become, to me, performative acts, because they don't really change the narrative because a person is already starting off with the wrong premise, right? Because without the historical framework, you still, by and large, subconsciously, you would grow up to believe that it is on the individual. So the individual, the fault is with the individual. And that's why systems and structures don't change that much, because the way the training is done, the assumption is that, well, everybody knows this. And so we'll just start training from here. Well, actually, when you talk to people, you ask most people about, even the Reconstruction period. You talk about post Civil War, and a lot of people would think, well, hey, the Emancipation Proclamation and all these amendments, 13, 14, 15. It's like, hey, you guys, it's been almost 150 plus years, and what's going on? Like, what more can we do? Like, if Black people or Native American people haven't advanced, hey, it's all your fault. Well, what you don't learn is that there was a period after the Civil War where there was a huge amount of just backlash, right, against the Civil Rights Act of 1865, which actually was the thing that actually was the formalization of ending slavery. But there's a huge amount of information about what Southern states and governments did to undermine all of these amendments, all of these laws. And so when you don't know that, a lot of people don't know even about Black codes or Jim Crow. And so when they don't know about that, they don't understand these structural barriers that are in place. And so they'll assume that, well, hey, we're doing all this training, so why aren't we moving the needle? And so when I look at the needle, what I mean is I'll look at demographic data across a lot of different perspectives. So not just how many people of color, women you have in your workforce, but I also look at other metrics as well. So I look at what is the level of voluntary turnover of these underrepresented groups, because that's an indicator, right? When you look at the disaggregated data on what you call your climate surveys or culture surveys, well, a lot of times companies will show data and they say, hey, 80% people say, hey, they love it here. And I say, yeah, let me see the disaggregated data, because I know normally, and it's sad to say, once I look at the disaggregated data, well, usually like when they show Black and Hispanic and all of that, that number is always significantly lower. Like 99.9, it's a significantly lower number than the white, population that would say, hey, that fit me. Like, I refer somebody to work here. And so when I look at this aggregated data, that tends to tell me that, well, all this training, it apparently isn't doing enough, because people are starting off at they're not starting off at the same level of information. So I think that's where we are as a university. We're doing, some of this kind of surface level training. I think, the next step would be to get to that deeper level.
Thank you.
And could I just add a little something to what Roderick just said? I also was in a university context, and now I'm in secondary schools, and we also have seen a bump up in training and great information, well-researched topics that we have to look at. But as an educator, I also look at Bloom's taxonomy, where when we're just giving information, often that information is lost or not applied. So to move up to a more a deeper level of intrinsically getting that information, I think what would be helpful is allowing for spaces and contexts of trust, so that people can discuss and have, like you said, Kadra, those difficult conversations, but not having that time to reflect is where the information goes in and goes out, because you don't have those conversations and you don't talk about what it means to you or ask the questions you need to ask. So having that reflection time, I think, bumps it up to the level of not just passing information, but actually having it become a part of you and having it something that you can kind of get your teeth into and be able to have a conversation. So the research shows that reflection really is where learning takes place and then becomes a part of the person.
Thank you. I think those were all very good points that you all brought up. So our next question is, what are the primary diversity and inclusion issues you see in the workplace? And feel free to speak as broadly as you'd like. And Roderick, we'll start with you on this one.
All right, let me get off mute here. So I would say that's a few issues. So one of the main things we've struggled with is our past, right? Sins of the past, so to speak. So there were a lot of issues around Confederate statues on campus. So when I started working there, that was like the big firestorm that I kind of walked into, and that built or that created a lot of mistrust and angst in the student body. Number two, I would say would be, especially since COVID-19, I would say there's been a lack of I would say plans, career advancement plans for people of color. I'll just put it like that. And what I mean by that is a lot of times your underrepresented groups at the university, they'll see these leadership development programs or these advancement programs for faculty usually, but for staff, there's not much there. And so then even more so for the small number of underrepresented groups at campus, those tend to be the things where people look at like, hey, there's a lot of this, types of informal networks, and people will kind of get tapped into certain roles and certain jobs. Well, a lot of your underrepresented groups don't have all those built-in networks to have somebody to tap them on the back and say, hey, I'm preparing you for this, or hey, you should apply for that. And so I think I've talked to certain groups and people say they'd like a little more transparency around that, or to have some transparency around what do our promotions look like, and if you disaggregate that data, if you look at the employees that are promoted over let's say a certain time period, what does that look like? Are there any disparities if you disaggregate that data, right? Are there any disparities in pay if you disaggregate that data, right? Are there any disparities in performance evaluations, right? So there are a lot of things where a lot of biases and stereotypes manifest within these systems. And until you disaggregate, a lot of times people are feeling that something is going on, but there's no hard data to back it up. And so I believe those are some of the key issues that we struggle with, and that we are bringing to the table. There's an employees forum. That employees forum, tends to bubble up some of these issues around, pay equity and advancement opportunities and general fairness.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to chime in on how that works in their field?
Yeah, this is Sheldon. I will go. I think that some of the primary issues I see in the workplace today, not just in the educational field, but other industries as well, is just looking at diversity as more of an asset versus a liability. Sometimes organizations are making decisions and being very reactionary. In other words, they're trying to prevent certain things from happening. And so they may have the diversity efforts around that in terms of their hiring practices. In some cases, just getting just enough. Maybe they're getting one person or two people just to make sure that they're in a safe mode, relative to looking at diversity as an opportunity, as an asset, that there's so many opportunities that you can take advantage of because your customers are diverse, your employees are diverse, your suppliers, to Kadra's point around, just managing the whole supplier diversity. A lot of your stakeholders are already diverse. And as you think about innovation, as organizations seek to try to separate themselves and be more innovative, what better way by having a very diverse culture so you can come up with new ideas? Because organizations, the way they perform in the past, probably will not be able to sustain themselves in the future. So I think diversity brings about a lot of innovative thinking, so you can get away from the group think by hiring people that that are traditionally you're comfortable with. So I think by embracing diversity as an asset versus a liability, and what can you do just to keep yourselves out of trouble? So I'm seeing more organizations now wanting to become more aware of what they can do, just given a lot of the social injustices that occurred in the last several years. And so I think from an educational standpoint, we have a unique opportunity as well as a responsibility to teach and as well as learn more about the diversity efforts that are going on. And I think it was Roger that was talking about biases and prejudice. A lot of us don't understand the differences between bias, prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination. We think it's all of that's one. So I think we have an opportunity to certainly educate ourselves, and as an educator, make sure you're teaching that to our students as well as the overall population that you're touching.
And I'd like to add on to what Sheldon said. He just made me think of something. You know, what happens, a lot of these companies, you start thinking, so I just did a presentation a couple of weeks ago about, you know, equitable hiring, right? And this is based off a lot of research I've done on, you know, a few hundred companies. And these are your big public companies that have a lot of data that you can find. And I was talking about the business case. I do a lot talking about beyond the business case, right? Because there, what you see kind of creeping in now is this move toward stakeholder capitalism. And so that is opening the doors to more of these conversations about diversity, more on a social justice scale, more of a, you know, a right thing to do perspective, right? And because the business case, you know, what it led to, in my opinion, and this is, you know, kind of trying to support it with data, is it led to a lot of performative acts in the sense that it didn't change the system structurally, right? And so, but what you saw, you know, on the surface, like, hey, we're hiring more people of color, we're hiring more women, but when you look at the data, like the numbers don't change much at the top. So even if you think of this funnel, yeah, you get a lot of people in that funnel, right? And so the lower echelons of your organization, it may be relatively reflective of however you decide to look at proportionality, right? Whether that's the community in which your office, your organization is based, the community which it serves. If you want to look at national populations, I mean, there's no right or wrong. I make the case there's no right or wrong. But when you look at the data, every, just about every company I look at, the percentages do not change. If you look at the leadership, your senior executive level of leadership and above, right? So this is your C-suite, VPs, directors as well. You know, kind of executive level, VPs, director, but then getting to your senior C-suite and then to your board. The percentage of Blacks and Hispanics, especially, is always between 2 and 5%, always consistently. Regardless of how many are at the bottom, that's just about how many are going to get the top. And when you look at your white males, and this is referencing a report that McKinsey did last year, well, your white males are hired at a higher level coming into the funnel. So let's say 60%, or let's say 30% come in, you know, entry level, right? Well, the C-suite, they're like 60%. So they're overrepresented, you know, as they go into the organization in terms of representation. Even when you're going up the ranks and personnel is getting smaller in terms of levels of management on an org chart, your white males are typically overrepresented if we're talking about just the corporate, you know, American context. And everybody else, white women, they become underrepresented as well, but they go down a little slighter clip. Black males are next in line. They, you know, come in, let's say, you know, 18%, but then as they move, you know, through the organization, their percentages go down as they go higher and higher. And then women of color, in particular with this McKinsey report address, Black women and Latino women, they go down as well, right? And so it's very curious. Well, and so my argument is, well, if the business case was so good, you know, the business case has been around, you know, a long time. Why are these numbers really changing that much? And so this is where the race, you know, kind of like Sheldon Gathers just stated, when you conflate prejudice, stereotypes, bigotry, you know, all of that with racism. Like a lot of times people just use it interchangeably. And I always try to undo that. I say, as much as I can, try to educate people like, no, racism actually has a different meaning. Right? You just can't call somebody racist if they're being prejudiced. So you can't call them racist if they're being a bigot. Like racism actually has a definition. You know, racist, racism, they're, you know, we're talking about systems, we're talking about power. And so because people don't understand that, a lot of this, you know, would be by design in terms of, you know, if you go back to the 70s and 80s, you know, how the media was just conflating these words and throwing it out and passion affirmative action and making it seem like it was just, oh, we're just giving Sheldon a job and they're just giving him a job over people. He's not even qualified. You know, they would just throw things out like that. Oh, you know, reverse racism. Those concepts don't even exist. Like, you know, people say, well, now, you know, if we do affirmative action or any other corrective measure, isn't that reverse racism? And I always say, well, so what was the status quo? You know, what was that? You know, and reverse racism is not it doesn't exist because there are no structures, there are no systems of powers that any other minority group, or racial minority, especially, you know, Black people, controlled in the U.S. that could affect the material outcomes of anybody in the white race because the system was not built for us, right? And so, but if you don't understand that history, then you start just throwing terms out and conflating things, and then you won't understand why those numbers are still small.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So that actually leads into one of our questions. You were talking about C-suite leadership. So we all hope that our managers, bosses, and higher ups care about diversity and inclusion and try to do whatever's possible to increase that within the workplace. What would you suggest to those that have a boss that don't value diversity? How would you handle that manager or individual? And we'll let whoever wants to start first on this one.
I will go since I was trying to yield to Lorraine or Kadra, but I will start. I think if you have a boss or a manager that's not valuing or embracing diversity, I would certainly, one, ask your manager and or your manager's manager if the organization overall embraces diversity. Obviously, you can't pick your manager and you can't pick your boss. In most organizations, you don't have that opportunity. But I'd certainly look to see what your organization stance is on it in terms of their mission, their purpose. Most organizations now, given a lot of the things that happened around social injustice over the last couple of years, they're issuing statements that they believe in diversity, they embrace this. So I think the first step is to make sure your organization overall embrace it. And then once you see what your organization stance is, certainly ask your manager or someone, even whether it's someone in human resources or a mentor or someone outside of your manager or boss, just in terms of what you can do potentially to get involved to start to make a difference. Because it's one thing to complain about what the organization's not doing, there's another to make sure you're offering up meaningful solutions. I.e., can you help start a diversity network, as Kadra mentioned earlier, for women or for African-American or Hispanics or for Asians or for LGBTQ organizations? Can you help start a mentoring program? So there are things that you can do in terms of giving ideas in terms of, that the organization could potentially embrace. And there's a lot of organizations that are doing great things that you can look and model and help your organization to move forward in that particular area. So I would start by, one, looking at the organization from a company perspective, and then asking if you can get involved, because you can't pick your manager. And so you don't want to just focus just on your manager, because the organization overall may be doing some good things or have an opportunity and be willing to do some things if you can offer up some viable solutions.
I was just good. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Did you want to throw to somebody? Because I'm
Nope.
happy to step back.
You're good. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in the context of education, so I'm now teaching middle school. That's a tough question because your boss is there's like a power imbalance there, to try to, bring light to things that maybe someone doesn't want to see or can't see. That's a really tough question, and especially if you're newly hired, that's really difficult. But I would just begin with trying to build trust with that leader and modeling what you would like to see. I would also begin with seeing what that leader values. So if it's your principal or it's your mentor, see what that leader values and then begin there. And then if there are analogies that can be drawn with, well, you see this as being fair or not being fair, you could maybe try to draw an analogy with what they see as important or not important. I lived in Japan and I didn't really know much about Japanese culture. And so that's how I kind of learned to kind of fit in and also make statements very indirectly by just first gaining the trust of that person, building that relationship. And then after that was established, say, I've thought about this, and then bringing up the topic. Know that you can't always change people. I mean, let's be honest, it's hard to change ourselves, let alone other people. So that's not where, don't even try to do that, but trying to build trust. And if that person is is difficult, then I would say like just trying to model in smaller incremental changes, and hoping that relationship will have them to open up and listen to maybe what you would have to say.
Thank you. Kadra, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Well, Sheldon and Lauren gave perhaps the exact same answer that I would have, and did it so well and eloquently. And I would say that to piggyback off of Sheldon's responses, a lot of companies, in light of, again, the issues that are going on in the world today, they are issuing statements that they value diversity. And it's kind of a template, because it's one thing to talk it, but is the company walking it? And you want to make sure that, number one, that you are getting into an organization that does value diversity, that does understand what it means to be inclusive and to have that kind of environment and present that sort of environment for their employees. So if they are in fact doing that, if they are walking the walk and doing what they're supposed to do in terms of what is indeed the right thing, then that means that their management, their C-suite, their employees overall should also mimic the culture that they are actually promoting publicly. And if they're not, then it's time to have a discussion. Again, getting a little bit uncomfortable in order to get comfortable in your workplace, the place that you give 40+ hours of your life every week. And sometimes that may even include an HR discussion. There are folks that are aligned to HR business partners. There are counselors that that are strategically aligned to help with these sorts of issues. That if you're not feeling comfortable in the workplace, or if there's an issue involving D&I that needs to be a little bit further investigated, then sometimes if it gets to that level where it is escalated, where the employee may not feel comfortable talking to talking to their manager, or where there is an issue that has escalated to the point that is beyond just a simple discussion for just general understanding with the manager, sometimes you do have to escalate that. And that is a very real response to the issues that we're facing today. It can be a little bit uncomfortable and unfortunate that it gets to that point of having to escalate these concerns, but sometimes there are those professionals that are supposed to be centered in organizations that can help you navigate through those difficult discussions.
Nice. Thank you for that. So a lot that I picked up on that is that you guys were mentioning kind of the social media blast and things that had happened over this past summer. So with that being said, in your offices and corporations, how are those conversations still being continued? I know it's important to value them, and you all stated that, forming small groups and things like that, but what does it look like exactly to others to expose them and educate them?
I think I can start with that. I would say that from what I'm seeing internally within my organization, and having had talks with friends that work in other organizations, our leaders that are in the forefront of HR and communications, they understand that they can no longer, they cannot turn a blind eye to these issues. Understanding that, when you turn on the news and you're seeing these issues that are unfolding right before our very eyes, that has caused a lot of emotional distress, and has ignited a movement, so to speak. It does reflect, and it can reflect in the outcome of our work, right? And so therefore what's happening is that our communications teams and our marketing teams and our HR teams are learning that we have to turn on the faucet, so to speak, that we have to have those discussions, and that we do have to be real. We have to acknowledge that there are concerns that are going out in the world today, and we are concerned about our employees, and that we want you to know that we care. And it's great that our organizations are doing that. And I can speak personally to my organization, they are acknowledging that there are issues in the world and that they care about their employees, that they want to bring us together for these conversations. And again, this reflects in our groups and in the groups that we have internally that help people of color have those discussions, that help the LGBTQ community have those uncomfortable discussions as well, and that we can have that dialogue. And sure, there may be some folks that are not comfortable yet, or that still are holding on to that bias, but at least that there has to be that acknowledgement that we have a teammate that may be going through some issues because of their gender or their race, their ethnic background, their sexual orientation, and they have those support groups there to assist them in unlocking and pouring out those concerns. And so again, those organizations are allowing that platform and are not going with what it used to be and just let's remain kind of hold a cover, or they're pulling the curtain back and allowing these conversations to be had. And so there's an acknowledgement of the differences in the workplace. And again, it's not just about the issues that are happening in the world, okay? It's about embracing, acknowledging, and celebrating the differences that exist in our workplace.
Thank you for that. Roderick, did you want to speak out on it at all for UNC?
Yeah, so I'll just add, and thank you again, Kadra. I think you summed up a lot as well. So I'll be very brief. One of the things that we've done, and really like since last year, that kicked off a lot of things, because there was so much made apparent. Like you say, you see on national TV, so people like literally getting killed, right? And so those things shocked, I believe, the nation into action. And so just in our world, in terms of what we could control in the UNC Chapel Hill within the career services department I work in, we, first of all, we started going through all of our policies and practices. We started going through our website. We started looking at the language we use to see if the language was inclusive, to see if there were, any things that we were wording in certain ways that could be, offensive to certain groups. I mean, just doing a deep dive that had never been done before, because we didn't know. I mean, a lot of times when you just come into an organization, there's already existing content, and nobody thinks, hey, let's just go back through this to see if this is reflective of the reality that we're in now in terms of the diversity of spectrums of diversity that we have in this campus, right? So it's a lot of work, and I always tell people, like, diversity is hard work. Because it's easy when you're only dealing with any one spectrum. So it does take work. So we did that from a student-facing side, and with the employer-facing side. One of the things that we did with my team in particular, we said, well, for any organization that wants to participate in a diversity-themed event, right? And I kept having to repeat, this is only specific to diversity-themed events. Then we would have to evaluate with the scorecard, right? And that scorecard, not meant as a punitive tool by any means. It's just saying, hey, if we're going to have you in front of specific groups, underrepresented groups in particular, then we want to know who we're bringing into the room, right? Just like an organization, when they're looking at your resume and your transcript and references, they're evaluating you. They say, hey, we want to know who we're talking to before potentially come into an organization. And so we want to do the same thing. We just want to see, okay, to the extent that we can, based on publicly available information, we just want to see, okay, do you make certain data transparent, right? And then beyond transparency, do you actually have accountability around that data as well, right? So I look at two metrics, or two dimensions, right, of data. And so, for example, if I'm having a corporation come in and talk to a group of underrepresented students, let's just say women, women in engineering, for example. And if I ask the organization before they even come, I say, hey, do you have data on how many women are in senior leadership roles within your organization? Well, if the company says, well, we can't really release that data, I can't in good conscience and good faith invite that organization to that particular event. Because what am I then communicating to these young women who might ask and say, hey, could you tell us how many women are in senior leadership in your organization? And how embarrassing would it be if the company says, no, I'm sorry, we just can't release that information? Or during the interview, if we coach our students, like, hey, ask these questions, right? This is your best time for you to get that information. And it's not a bad question to ask. Hey, could you tell me about, career paths for women. Like what representation do women have in different levels of leadership? And during the interview, if a company says, well, we can't tell you that. So I don't want to invite those type of companies to these type of events. And I have to make sure I'm very clear with the company, say, hey, let me help you, to be able to change your narrative and help you see why that information is important. Let me show you some data from your competitors. Let me show you, I'm happy to show you information that your competitors make transparent on these very questions I'm asking you. So this is not just gotcha types of questions. This is data that normally is public, transparent, if the company chooses to make it so. And I'm helping the organization with their communications and how they can reach these underrepresented groups, how they can look internally. I had one company say, hey, we had to actually have discussions. They had discussions based on the scorecard and things I was asking because they realized they weren't transparent with their data. And they were like, well, why aren't we transparent with this? And then they start looking at their disaggregated data and they start understanding that, wow, there's some things we need to fix internally so that we can have an authentic story to sell or to tell.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. That's pretty interesting to hear how you guys use your scorecard there. Did anyone else want to chime in for that? Okay, so we'll keep moving forward. So what barriers do you feel like we're up against? We've talked a lot about ways that we can improve and move forward. But when we're doing that, we kind of always know that we're going to be faced with something that we're probably not expecting. So what barriers do you see? And we'll start with Lorraine.
In the field of education, secondary education, I feel that just some of the old ideas, just old ideas about how things have always been done and how, well, majority is enough. And when I speak of this, I mean, my students, my English language learners, in our district, there are 200 different languages that are home languages that are spoken from the kids. The majority of them are Spanish speakers. And so I just feel like sometimes in the field of education, we just say, well, most of them are Spanish speakers, so we can just translate it in Spanish. But what about the other 199 speakers? Giving access to the parents who maybe the kids have good English language ability to communicate things, but the parents should be able to make the decisions. And so one of the barriers, I think, is just broadening the idea that, most of it is enough. You need to be able to allow access to everyone. That's what makes it equitable, not just the majority, because then you have inequity all over again. Just because we have things in one language, or we grab the person down the hall that speaks a little bit of Spanish. I think a parent should be able to have access to information in a professional way, and that requires a translator. So I think one of the barriers in education, I'm not speaking just about my school district, but overall, is moving past old ideas that, well, this is how it's always been done, this is good enough, it's the majority. Equity is equity, and equity means everyone has an equal playing field to access information, whether it be a child in a classroom. So in English language classrooms, sometimes there's a content teacher that's teaching the math, and the English teacher comes and visits and tries to help the student that's learning. And sometimes the communication between the content teacher and the English teacher is not great. And so the math teacher just expects the teacher to translate like they're a translator in Korean or something, or expects them to dumb down the information so it's just easier, but that's not access. That's not equitable access. So just this idea, I think maybe Roderick or Kadra or Sheldon, I can't remember who spoke about things being accessible. I'm just losing my thought there. Well, anyway, just having information being accessible in an equitable way, I think, is a huge barrier that we need to move forward in for my students and for the parents to be able to make good decisions. That gives them autonomy and helps them to feel like they can, make decisions for themselves. They can't do that if they don't have access to the information or the tools to get the information.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Lorraine was talking about around equity, because I think one of the barriers is that this diversity is just a fad and that it's probably going to pass. And this is kind of the issue of today. And sometimes we live in the 24-hour news cycle, and that relative to addressing some of the long-term systemic issues that are going on. And as long as you're not, or I am not personally, exhibiting bad behavior or discriminating, then I'm doing my part relative to tackling some of the more difficult issues, as well as opportunities that might exist. So I think that the fad concept is there, and if you just do just enough to stay out of trouble, and if you have your one or two people that represent, i.e. diversity, then that's enough. So as compared to making the big structural changes that will make everyone feel included, that will truly bring about equity. So I think there again, that there's just so much opportunity in terms of understanding what this is all about, that how do you transform from I'm not being a bad person, I'm not discriminating against anyone, I like everyone, to addressing some systemic issues within the organization. And then more importantly, how do you measure that? Do you have matrix in place to see, okay, here's where we are, and here's our benchmark in terms of where we want to be? Because if you don't measure it, you certainly are not going to achieve your overall goals.
Thank you for that. I think that's all very valid points that you all brought up. So we will now transition to, and I want everyone to answer this if possible, but what general advice would you offer college students preparing for the professional world that will help them respond appropriately to diversity issues at work?
Well, first I would tell them to do is do your research. And so one of the things is almost like the advice that a doctor would give you, right? They say, hey, we want to try to do some preventative tactics. We don't want you to get the disease or whatever, because then the treatment is a lot harder, right? So prevention, and the best thing a student can do to the extent they're able is to research these organizations, right? And that goes beyond what you can find just on their websites. But there are a number of sites out there, social media, as you mentioned earlier, Janae, looking at Glassdoor.com or LinkedIn or any number, of resources now where people talk about their experiences, talking to alumni. So all universities have alumni chapters, and you can find your alumni on LinkedIn and connect with them and connect with people who share any type of demographic background that's important to you, and try to ask, hey, I see this on the company's website, everything looks good, or I've talked to a recruiter, but let me talk to you to get the real story, right? And so to the extent that you can't do that for every company, but for your short list of companies, try to find out information that you can beyond what a particular, company rep may tell you, so that you know what you're going into, eyes wide, shut, so to speak. Now, and I tell people, I'm very careful. I say, you may find some bad things out, but so what? Don't try to, we're not here to bat 1,000. Like, you're not trying to find the perfect company, because then you'll just be unemployed. What you want to do is just say, hey, every company is going to have some challenges. You're just not trying to walk into a minefield. Like, you don't want to walk into a company that has like some glare, like in the news, like they're just like glaring stuff going on, to where you say, okay, I don't want to go into that organization. But there are going to be some challenges, and people are going to say, yeah, there's some issues here. They struggle with this and this and this. But I always tell people, then look at that as a challenge. Look at that, and I think Sheldon mentioned earlier, what can you do individually? Because the structures and systems take a long time to change. So you have to be a change agent. So don't be afraid to go in and say, I know what I'm going into, and let me prepare myself mentally, and maybe I can only hang in 2 years, but when I go in those 2 years, I'm going to make sure I get ABC skills, and that's why I'm going to make XYZ connections. And this will build my portfolio to go to the next company that may have a better setup in terms of how they treat people. But don't let every little detail make you say, oh, no, I can't work there because they have this problem. Because then you're just, where are you going to run? Like, it's you can't run anywhere. Like trust me, I tried. That's why I tell people, you can't run. And so at some point, it's like the scene in The Matrix where, Neo was about to run away and he just stopped. He said, I may as well fight because I can't run. Like, I'm in the Matrix. Like, where are you going to run? And so you have to just say, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to make the best out of this situation. And I may become the first. I may be the one that opens up, the doors or some barriers. I may be the one that starts the first, like say, affinity group or employee resource group. Somebody has to be that first, right? Or they have to come behind someone who's already opened that pathway. And so that's the advice I give students: do your research, but don't do a paralysis by analysis. Don't be afraid of what you find, and don't go looking for this mythical perfect Shangri-La company, because it doesn't exist. You're still dealing with people. Just know what you're getting into, because then preparation would be your shield, and you go in with a mindset to be successful in spite of potential challenges that you may face.
If I may add to that, that is exactly right, Roderick. I mean, you cannot expect butterflies and rainbows every day on the job. There are going to be days when you do not feel like going to work. There are going to be days when you don't want to open that laptop. You're going to get aggravated with the email you just received. There are going to be days like that. So there is no perfect organization at 100% level as far as, your feeling about, turning on every single day. But the goal is to get with an organization that that you're going to be healthy, that your mental is going to remain intact, that cares about your well-being, that has programs in place such as ergonomics. Even something as small as ergonomics and how your setup is. They care about your physical, they care about your mental. There are other topics that you should research. The keyword is research about an organization. And so what I would advise, any undergraduate or graduate that is beginning to step into the workplace is, number one, of course, again, do your research. But number two, the blast applications of sending out multiple applications to a lot of places, sometimes that's not going to be effective. I know that the goal is to land that job, but you want to make sure that you're getting with an organization that cares about you. And so, again, doing that internal research as far as the programs that an organization has to offer, their employee network, the benefits, such as do their benefits include mental health? Does it include, fitness and wellness? Do they perform wellness evaluations? Are there any employee groups that you can join and that you can have open dialogue with? Do you know that the team that you're going to be joining and that you want to interview, and during the interview, ask these questions: what is the culture? What is the culture of this organization? What can I expect out of the workplace or out of my department? What types of things are available to the employees? These are the things that you're going to want to look for when it comes to locating that dream job, so to speak. And also, of course, again, piggyback on your alum network. Utilize your college resources. Past students that have gone on into the workplace, and there are multiple platforms that you can reach out. Not just the alumni network, but of course, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place to connect with that person and say, hey, I see that you graduated from my college, but I also see that you're applying to this organization that I am interested in. Can you give me some background? Those things are very important to ensure that beyond just the topic of diversity and inclusion, that you are going to get with an organization that has everything intact and everything that you're looking for a healthy workplace.
And I just want to tag on to that, Kadra. Thank you for so carefully laying that out for students. It's very, very practical. I just want to speak to a kind of tangent point on that. And that is, let's say you do, it's happened to me. I did my research very well, and I found this is the place that I wanted to be. I was thrilled to be there. And, workplaces change, people move, managers, get promoted. And so it sometimes ends up being a place that is not exactly what you thought it was going to be. I just want to give new graduates encouragement that sometimes you can't make change. You can't change the environment. You can't change how people are or their attitudes. And in those situations, just know that if you can't change other people, that you are being changed in the situation, that you are learning to become stronger. You're learning what your resources are. I don't know who it is, but someone has said, adversity introduces us to ourselves, and we can find that deeper strength and be honed, and see what skills that would never really surface in any other situations. We have different perspectives in the valley than we do at the mountaintop. So I would follow the advice of these experts here, but if you end up in a situation that's not ideal, just know that you may not change the situation, but you can be changed in the situation, and definitely for the better.
And I just want to piggyback on both what Lorraine and Kadra indicated and say that I think you have to do a deep analysis of who you are, make sure you know your strengths, your weaknesses, what opportunities you want to take advantage of, what threats that are out there. So do a SWOT analysis on yourself and make sure you are ready, i.e. from a skill set standpoint. Do you know what your technical skills are? Do you know what your human skills are, the ability to get along with people? Are you a problem solver from a conceptual standpoint? And of course, have your resume and elevator pitch already down, because you're out there competing globally. So you got to make sure that you're ready and always looking for an opportunity and knowing who your network is, knowing what company you want to be a part of. Does that fit as part of your overall strategy in terms of where you're looking to go? So view yourself from a strategic standpoint. Who am I? What am I good at? Do you know that? If you don't, it's hard to convince a potential employer to hire you and to compensate you at the level you would like to. So you've got to make sure that you're ready and you're prepared to have those discussions in a very efficient manner, as well as, going through the various channels with LinkedIn or Handshake and all the different tools that are out there for you. So I would just say, make sure you are ready.
Thank you all for those responses. I think they're great for our students and others to hear on this call. Really quick to our audience that's here tonight, please don't forget, if you have any questions that you would like our panelists to answer, go ahead and start dropping those in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those as soon as we can. But for our panelists, what are some of the best resources that you would recommend, online resources or physical, for students and educators to help them learn and grow more on this topic? And we'll start with whoever.
I'll start. And on this topic, so I just tell people just Google. Because you would get, there's so many resources out there. Like it really is overwhelming. And so I tell people, Google, just questions about, how to know more about diversity, equity, inclusion, just from a surface level, right? But if you have to learn the history of the U.S. And I tell people, no matter what your demographic, group you belong to, it's American history. And because a lot of people don't know real American history, we continue to have a lot of problems that are just exacerbated. And I tell people, yeah, I'm African-American, but I wasn't born with the African-American history gene. So, it's not like I just came out the womb and just, knew African-American history. Like I had to learn it too, but I didn't just learn things through a textbook and K through 12. But that narrative is what most people learn. And so I tell people, go back and learn a deeper dive about what happened with, indigenous peoples, Native Americans, and Black Americans, pre-slavery, post-slavery. And when you learn it, and all the way up through the civil rights, not only the 1865, but also, in the 1965 as well, like learn about it and beyond. Because what it would do, it would help you to be empathetic, right? And that is for race agnostic. I don't care if you're African-American, because I tell people African-Americans are not just one monolithic group. But when you just aggregate data, this means there's some generalities that associate with the group, but we're individual thinkers within that group. So everybody that identifies as Black African-American is not thinking the same. And so I tell everybody, just, educate yourself, and so that you have a framework and understanding of, oh, I understand how we got here. I'm from Alabama, and I think Lorraine said she went to University of Alabama. I also am a graduate from University of Alabama, and I used to be a high school teacher as well. And I would say that's probably the most rewarding experience in my life, hands down, because I thought I was empathetic before, because I've lived out of the country for over 10 years and You know, I've had all these different experiences. I told you I was running. I was the runner. I was the one that said, no, I'm going to find Shangri-La. I'm going to find this mythical workplace. And then, anyway, but when I taught in high school, I learned so much. I became more empathetic than ever when I had to teach in a low-income high school and really understand, you know, what people were going through at the community level. And then I did research and I started saying, well, why are these disparities here? And I started doing like a deep dive. And it's just like, wow, it made me so much more empathetic to be able to get on another person's level, not to stay there, but to be able to teach them and educate them to help them rise up to where they should be out of this kind of artificial place that they were set in and that they thought, well, this is just where I belong. And I said, no, that's not where you belong. So, you know, empathy comes with learning true history so that you don't get caught up in all this world of misinformation we live in now, which is quite scary. And to the last bastions of truth, most people, students in particular, young people, look to organizations now as the place to get truth from. They don't trust other sources now, not even really government. So organizations have a larger responsibility to truth.
I would like to say that I believe that experience is a great teacher. And I would say, you know, if you're very passionate and have a goal to understand differences, to understand and gain a greater perspective as far as why diversity is important, to you know, the person that you sit beside on a daily basis, you want to know more about what makes you all different, unique, and then what also brings you together. Don't be afraid to initiate that conversation. I believe that we are now at a point in time where um, you know, it's okay. It's okay to step out and say, hey, I want to ask a question. I recognize that there are differences and I recognize that there are issues in the world and there may be something that you're going through that I have no clue about because I don't experience it. It's not a part of my world. I believe that we're now in a safe space now where we can actually have that type of dialogue without offense. I can personally say that from experience, I did have those conversations when I was a student in Gardner-Webb, and this was in the mid 2000s when issues were present, but it was not as prevalent as they are today. It was not out in social media. Instagram was not out, and Facebook was just beginning, and so therefore it was just about posting a picture and letting your classmate know what you were doing the day before with your friends. But now today, social media is putting everything on the forefront and showing that there is so much more in the world that we're living in. And today's college student is seeing the same thing that we're now seeing as adults. And so therefore, I believe that, at any age group, at any point in life, it should be okay to have those careful discussions with your friends, your classmates, your teachers, and of course within your workplace. Again, that place that you sit at 40 plus hours a week, and you want to have a greater understanding of uniqueness that exists amongst your peers and your colleagues. So just again, going based off of experience and having that type of honest conversation is very important. At least it is to me.
Hey, I just wanted to give a plug to the Professional Readiness Center, to Micah Martin and his team. An excellent resource. I've actually partnered with them for the last 5 years, and we send students to them to make sure they have their resumes together, they have their elevator pitches, we do a SWOT analysis. So they've got excellent resources. So for students that are out there, of course, we have career fairs every semester or every other semester. There are tons of opportunities there in terms of internships. So if you're not leveraging these tools, I mean, it's difficult to go out there just and do everything via the internet. So there's some excellent resources that are available, and it's an excellent time for you to build relationships with former alum, as well as industry people that you're interested in, actually the industries that that you're interested in going into. So please leverage the Professional Readiness Center.
I just wanted to add one quick thing to Kadra's point about educating yourself. And I know some of you are seniors, you're about to graduate and you're thinking more school, I don't want to educate anymore. But never stop learning. And one piece that might be helpful, I usually tell my students, well, at Gardner-Webb, when I was teaching intercultural competence, I said, well, to travel is a really great way to kind of develop that empathy piece. But, with the pandemic, it's very hard to travel. And in that semester, some of them couldn't travel because they were in school. So what I had them do, one of the assignments was to have them go into a context that they were unfamiliar with and they were essentially uncomfortable with. And so I had lots of interesting reports that I got back. One went to a rodeo, another went to like a club. She had never been to a club before. And so you feel that uncomfortable setting, you feel like the outsider, and you develop that empathy piece of this is how people feel when they're not accepted, when they're not looked at as the same, or at least as a peer or equal. And make note of, journal what those feelings are and what you think and what your reactions are. And you may see that in someone that you work with, and that will equip you in a way to help to either support, reach out, or at least educate yourself.
Now, see, now I got to add something because Laureen, my Alabama compatriot, sparked something in my mind as well. And I think I said earlier that I was the student that ran around the world trying to find out more about myself, but also trying to find out why the world was as it was, right? And that is when I tell you empathy skills, resiliency, I mean all of the above. So I'm from Alabama, but I worked in Mississippi. I went, to Florida, Georgia. I mean, just all over the United States. And I always wanted to know what it felt like to be the outsider. Like you just said, Maria, I wanted to know what does it feel to have to start over and be the different person? And when that wasn't enough, that's when I started going out of the country. I said, I want to know what it feels like to just be a foreigner. Like, I want to know where I just know nothing. I have to just start over from ground zero. And it does something to you because you break every paradigm that you've grown up with, like everything. I don't care what your race, gender, orientation, like everything is broken because once you're outside of your own country, especially, let alone your own city or state, you have to learn more about who you are as a person, right? And you have to adapt because you start to learn that every framework I've grown up with does not apply here. And so that's when you start to learn and have respect for differences and understanding, cultures and languages and political thoughts and beliefs and how people view certain things because you understand there's a history attached to those things. And that's why it's just so important when you do that, it would then make you say, well, at least just in my example, it made me even more curious about US history and other global cultures as well. But then the deeper you go down that rabbit hole, you learn a lot about yourself. And so why that's important, especially when you think about going into the workplace, I always tell people, I don't want to preach to the choir. Like, I want everybody, like, whatever your gender, race is, because you can be an ally and advocate. You don't have to be the person who's actually the brunt of any type of inequity, but allies and advocates, people that see things like John Lewis said, get in some good trouble. Somebody has to be that person that says, I see something wrong here. I don't like it because you're treating another human being unfairly. And I think when you have that mentality and you're going into today's workforce, you will make it a more equitable workplace where not only you will benefit whoever you are, but everybody that is around you and that comes behind you. And not to mention, as Sheldon said earlier, your customers of that organization are going to benefit as well.
All right. Thank you all so much for those responses for our students and others that have joined us tonight. I feel like this was definitely a very productive conversation, a lot that I learned myself, as I'm sure a lot of us on this call did. So thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you, thank you, thank you to our panelists who are part of this conversation to let us in on some insight of the professional world for those that's going to be there soon before we know it. So if you guys have any other questions or if you would like to reach out to our panelists, we have put some contact information over in the chat. So thank you all again. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Hey, y'all. I just wanted to say thanks. I know we've still got a few participants that'll probably pop on and off. I paused the recording, but y'all, this was great. This was so good. I mean, this is the first time we've done this. I mean, we wish we could have done it face to face, obviously, but this is the type of stuff we've got to continue doing. Not monthly. I mean, that's obviously something we can't do as a group monthly, but we've got to start infecting places in our university where this is the conversation that's taking place a lot more often than it is. Shay and I've just been sitting here talking about so many things that y'all have shared that we're like, wow, we haven't thought about that. And we need to do something with this, and we need to find so-and-so. And this is what our students need. And it's, like I said, it's not the dialogue they're getting in the classroom. So y'all, thank you so much. I mean, I appreciate Sheldon's kind words about bragging about what we do in the Career Center, but the thing that we don't do well in the Career Center are the things y'all talked about tonight. There's some big deficits for us. And so this is a first step in us starting to move in a direction that we should have been moving in 20 years ago. And Kadra, I thought it was great. You shared about your own experience here at Gardner-Webb too. I mean, that's a reminder that it is happening at times in pockets.
Right.
And it's real, and it's really healthy when it is. And so I just appreciate that. For all of you. I mean, Lorraine, so good to see you. Roderick, we first stumbled onto you through a leadership conference that Shay was doing. And she said, we've got to see if this guy can be on this panel. And Kadra, all these different people that I've come in contact with that know who you are through Gardner-Webb and through Atrium as well, spoke so highly of you. So again, I just feel like the expertise has been spread wide because nobody was really saying the exact same thing. And that's good. I mean, it's really good. So I noticed we had a lot of administrators on here tonight. I was really hoping for more students, but maybe this will get it started with our administration, because I think I counted 9 administrators that were on here. And I think that is, I'm surprised they were on here. So I think that was good, you know.
Absolutely.
So, Micah, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing, Micah, at our university as well. So student attendance at a lot of events has just been low. You know, I get it. You know, they're on virtual all the time. There's a deluge of virtual events going on, so they can't be everywhere. But the fact that we're able to record this, that to me is the blessing of being in virtual, because we're able to now record these things, and we make a lot of our things available on our website and share, you know, student group, so that it's part of the library that they'll be able to access. So absolutely, every time, you know, we do an event, I don't even worry about the numbers. I say, hey, you know, everybody can't make it live, but a lot of people are happy to receive the recording afterwards. And so I'm just grateful that we were able to do this together. I learned a lot as well from my colleagues, and I want to thank Shay personally for you know, just thinking about enough about me to reach out to me to invite me to this. And so I'm definitely appreciative of that.
Well, we again can't thank you enough, and we will have it up on our YouTube page. We've got it. We've just really started this year because of COVID. We pivoted to a lot of things online and realized recording them is the key. Getting them captioned and up there quickly is good to capitalize on the momentum. So that'll go up early next week, and we're again really appreciative to all of you. If we can do anything to ever repay the favor, I mean, I know it was a short amount of your time, but it was still your time. Please let us know if there's something we can do. And we're going to keep you in the Rolodex, because again, your expertise is so beneficial. We may come around in 6 months and try to have a conference, something that's live or virtual, you know, or in person, where we can do this again. So thank you again.
That's the only repayment I need. I just want to continue to give back to my university. So that's all that I need, is, you know, continuing to have that line. So I'm happy to help out in the future in any way I can.
We really appreciate it. And you probably have a wide network of other alumni that could do the same thing. And so anytime you have influence like that, send people our way. I mean, because we're trying to build on something. There's just 2 of us here. It's just Shay and I. And we feel like we're pretty efficient with a lot of the things we do, but we can't do it without experts like y'all that bring in this wealth of knowledge that we just don't have. And so it's really good. So thank you again. I'll send you all as a group. Sheldon got off the call, I think, but I'll send you all just a little thank you email tomorrow. And again, if we can ever repay the favor, you let us know.
Micah, if there's anything you need, please feel free to reach out. I'm always here for any assistance, any statistics, you know, advice, whatever.
Well, we may be hitting you up, because I think the industry you work in is a big gaping hole for our business majors and our communications majors. They don't understand what, not just healthcare, but what you do specifically in healthcare is a new thing.
Supply chain, very important within healthcare administration.
Diversity in that supply chain, that may be in the classroom a little bit, especially at the graduate level, but you could bring a wealth of just eye-opening information to those folks. So we may figure out a way to do that at some point.
Sounds great.
Well, thank you all again. Hey, Lorraine, quick mention too, Brad's birthday's coming up the 17th.
The 17th, and I think you're going to a wedding too, aren't you? Are you going the 21st to Jake's wedding? Or is that
We're
gonna
going to
be
do it on
totally
Zoom because it's in Austin, Texas. I'm not flying to Austin, Texas for this guy's
No,
wedding. No, I'm going
no.
to do it on Zoom. Yeah.
Well, Brad is not going to get his key lime pie cake, key lime pie this year, but maybe next
Well.
year. But happy birthday to Brad.
Well, it's so
Guys,
good to
thank
see
you
you. And
so much.
Janae, thank you for hosting. Janae, you did
Yes.
great.
Thank
I'm
you,
just
Janae.
just so
You
tickled
made me
to
feel
see you.
so comfortable, Janae. I was nervous, but you were just like, and so can we speak to you?
She's
Speak
great.
to you?"
She's great.
Yeah.
Thank you all
Janae.
again.
Awesome.
I'll go ahead and end it, but we'll be in
Okay.
touch. Thanks
All
again.
right.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank
everyone.
you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.